Hello, my name is Mark Taylor. Welcome to the Education on Fire podcast network. This show is sponsored by the National Association for Primary Education. There comes a time in every person's life when you realise it's not about doing what you are told, but doing what you know is right for you. Let us take a journey of learning and discovery with the world's most successful people who are living the life of their dreams, walking through life using their inner wisdom and being of service to others. Forget exams, grades and test scores. What is your purpose? As we let go of what we think should be and learn from our elders to gain knowledge, inspiration and a true sense of who we are. What are your dreams? Does your life have meaning? Are you living a life of significance? Let's talk with today's guest. Hello and welcome as we spend some more time together on the Learning on Fire podcast. My name is Mark Taylor. Today I'm talking to Richard Anderson. Hi Richard, thanks for joining me and let's explore the journey of who you are.
Hey Mark, great to be here. Appreciate it. A little bit about who I am. I'm in Minnesota, which is not always an Arctic tundra. We have beautiful summers and springs and enjoying that, and that kind of segues into a little bit of hobbies. I love mountain biking. I love motorcycling. I am a happy son, brother, husband, and father. I have one daughter who's in high school, and I'm also the chief culture officer at Imagine IT. So that keeps my daytimes fairly busy as well.
Yeah, I've seen you've had some pretty full-on weather this winter, haven't you? From what I can see from the weather forecast over here.
Yeah, we definitely have our use of shovels and snowplows and things like that. But, it's kind of a hibernation thing. I think we kind of like it. We get to go in and relax and do some inside projects. And then, boy, when that spring comes, you remember who all of your neighbors are and everybody gets their bicycles out and we really embrace the weather. So,
yeah, I completely agree. We're just going into June here as we're recording, and our garden's just exploded now with all our rose bushes and stuff have just come out, and it just smells beautiful, and the weather's just suddenly turned warm enough, I think, just to really bring everything on. And it seems a million miles away from, like, say, those winters we've got cozy fires and and all that kind of thing. But I certainly here it's that change of season, which I find really, really, really exciting. It's a way of living your life on an annual basis.
It really is, and it's kind of a refreshing thing for the soul. You come out and you remember that you're here to live life, and you go bike riding, and you do whatever it is you do. My wife loves to garden and landscape, and so we've been out pulling weeds and planting plants, and like you said, boy, those rose bushes or whatever it is, they all of a sudden just start popping, and you plant them and you come back 2 weeks later and it's a whole different experience. That's kind of fun. I like that.
Yeah, me too. And I think gardening for me as well, especially when things like roses, which I love. I think it goes back to the fact my granddad had a fantastic rose garden, and I have lots of sort of special memories of that. But I think it's the fact that essentially everything wants to grow and everything wants to prosper, and even in the harshest conditions, sometimes as soon as the conditions start to change and you just allow it to be, there's a new bud, there's a new bit of growth on the bush, and then it just really kind of gives you that life force sort of, I think, just transmits into all of us that are around it.
Yeah, what a great analogy. I love that line where you said everything wants to live, everything wants to bud, and that it's so true. And like you said, it's kind of like nature's fireworks display. If you just kind of put it in slow motion and watched it, it's beautiful. So yeah, good analogy. I like that.
Yeah, I love it. It's always my favourite thing. Find time every day to walk around the garden. It puts everything into perspective, which is absolutely brilliant.
For sure.
What does your life look like now, and how is it different from when you were growing up?
Yeah, boy, growing up, so we were middle class. Money was kind of tight. My parents were separated when I was fairly early, maybe around 10 or 11. I had one brother that I grew up with. We spent a lot of time alone. Dad was working, and mom lived far enough away that we really only saw her on weekends. And we didn't really travel a whole lot, but we really had a close-knit group of friends. And they came to our house a lot. We were playing neighborhood sports and kickball and baseball and tennis, whatever kind of ball or whatever kind of sport you could get a hold of. We would pull some guys together and we'd be having fun and playing. But it was a fairly simple life. We didn't have exorbitant budgets or the abilities to enjoy some of those more luxurious things. And I would say that as a general rule, we were pretty happy and we had a good time. And I don't remember being stressed. I remember feeling safe at all times. Life was pretty good, but looking back, I would say it was a little tight. I remember there was times where my dad was between jobs, and we were really kind of tightening our belts and trying to figure out where we could save some money. And for the most part, my brother and I were sheltered from that. But you know how it is. You can sense some of that, and so that was kind of my baseline. And I knew that when I graduated high school and I wanted to go to college, I wanted to make sure that I had that education and I could make potentially a better living for myself. And so that's what I did. And I went away to Marquette University, got a really good education, became a public accountant, and then later joined a very large multinational company where I learned a lot of good and bad things. And now I'm running a company with two partners, and we only have 40 employees. But what's different now is I saw my dad go to work as a job, and he would get up every day, put on the battle armor, and grab his briefcase, go to work, and then he would come home, usually later than he wanted, and he would be grumbling about someone or something. And I thought, ugh, what a terrible thing to look forward to, as you get older and you have this career, this thing, to have to go to work and dread it was just not something I wanted to do. And so when my partners and I started Imagine IT back in 2012, one of the first things we threw on the agenda was creating a company that we wanted to work for, like that place where you wanted to go to work, and that environment and that culture and that feeling and, just that community. And so what's different from today? I think that my daughter has a much different perspective of what her old man does when he goes to work than I did. And that's wonderful to be able to pay that forward and share that you don't have to work for organizations that don't appreciate you and don't reward your loyalty. I feel like we've created it, but I see a lot of companies doing what we do as well. Today is an employee's market. You can go get a new job tomorrow. So why not get one that you really love working at and love doing what they're doing? So to me, that's a big difference. I hope that I'm able to pay it forward a little bit there for the folks that are joining us. But I can tell you that was kind of a dread growing up. I don't know in your family or if, what kind of role models you had in that regard, but work to me was a 4-letter word and it wasn't a good one. So.
Yeah, I think lots of people find themselves seeing that, don't they, as they're growing up. And my dad was before he retired, was a motor mechanic, and he absolutely loved what he did, and he worked for himself a lot of the time from when I was quite small going up. And I think he wasn't particularly interested in school necessarily too much, but when he found that passion of kind of being able to get his hands dirty, work out how all these things worked, and, got an apprenticeship, went to college, got all those qualifications, and then sort of loved it really all the way through. And like I say, there's ups and downs to all of those types of things. But I think the one support that we all had, myself and my two sisters, was the fact that we were always supported to do what we loved and what we wanted to do, and I think when you've got that basis to start from, then you really do feel like it's a different world to live in than, like you say, you're going to have to just go and get something for a paycheck.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I love that A, you felt safe to pursue what it is that made you happy, but B, he led by example by doing something that he loved doing, whether or not it was the most glamorous or highest paying or most. If he loved doing it, then that's the right thing to do. I liked how your last podcast with Jerry talked about doing what you're passionate about, and boy, if you do that, it kind of doesn't really feel like work. Time just goes quickly, and so I'm glad we're able to create that. I'm glad that more people are doing that, like yourself. But boy, I don't know that wasn't the role model I had growing up. So that's definitely a difference.
Yeah, well, I think that's something, if we can all have that in our minds as we create whatever it is that we're doing, then, like you say, to pay it forward to our children and the people around us, that's a special gift to be able to do.
Yeah.
What was valuable about your school experience?
Yeah, in the new perspective of a parent, you see how your children go through school and what is bothering them or what pressures they have. So I guess in that hindsight, I genuinely felt safe. I see students now at certain schools, and of course, every district and every city and every state and every country is different, but there are definitely those schools where students feel the pressure and they don't feel safe, and they maybe don't even feel like they're cared for. The teachers are there doing their job, and I never had any of that. I felt like the teachers genuinely cared about me. I felt very safe. I had my close knit group of friends, and I felt like I was very well prepared for whatever was next. I don't know that I could have been an auto mechanic, but I definitely felt like I learned how to learn. And if there's anything that I think you can take away from school is that if you can learn anything, well, then you can do anything. And so if school taught me anything, it's that you can learn anything, right? Put your mind to it. Today it's a little easier. You go on Google or you go on YouTube, or you search online and you find some video, and next thing you know, you're changing your own carburetor. But back then you didn't have those resources, and so you had to read books or go to the library or find magazines or go to the library, talk to somebody. But somehow, some way, they taught me how to learn, and that was definitely probably the best lesson I had.
Yeah, I really love that, and I think it's interesting. I've talked about this before on the show, but that sense of, I certainly didn't learn how to podcast when I was at school, partly because we didn't even have the internet, let alone the whole idea of this new world that we're living in. But I think it is just that, there was something within me that just felt, as soon as I started hearing people doing it, started listening to podcasts, listening to this whole new world that was being developed, I thought, there's something there for me. And as it's turned out, I've got very heavily involved in it, but it is that kind of thing. If you can find anything, you can learn anything if you just immerse yourself in it and just allow you sort of attract the people that you need, I guess, in the situations and the learning environments. And like I say, anything is possible at that point.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which teachers do you remember and why?
Yeah, great question. I thought about this before we spoke, and I had a tough time picking because there were so many influential teachers, good and bad. But the ones that I wrote down were all from high school. I had one teacher, Arnie Cutler, who I don't think he's with us any longer, but he was our calculus teacher. And calculus, as you may recall, if you were subjected to that, is not a very easy class. But there was something about the way that he taught that demystified it, made it fun, made it challenging. And I don't know that I've ever seen a teacher so passionate. I mean, he would show up early, he would stay late, he would work through his lunches, and he always had someone in front of him where he was drawing pictures or highly engaged in helping them move forward. One of my most memorable things from him is he didn't like the word exam or test. He thought that it made people nervous. And so he made up this silly acronym called CB-LEFEP. It was a closed book learning experience for evaluational purposes, which is just silly, right? It was just another way of saying test or exam. But I liked how he got connected to the psyche, and he realized that word was a trigger for some people, so he figured out a different one. The other thing that he taught me and the rest of the class, he did a study once where he reviewed how well the students did who had other curricular activities versus those that didn't. And in his world, other curricular activities or other activities could be a part-time job. It could be on the soccer team. It could be whatever. But it had to be something that was like fairly significant, like things that you did, on a very, very regular basis. So his theory is that those people had less time. And what he was hypothesizing was they would either manage their time better or they would not do as well in school. He wasn't sure which way. And almost without exception, the study showed that those people that had other activities did better in his classes. And so ultimately he had to hypothesize that they were just better time managers. Well, the reason that was such a great lesson is as my daughter grew up, she was highly active in competitive gymnastics. And for anyone who has a student in that type of an activity, it's literally 20 to 25 hours a week. It's kind of a full-time job. And ultimately, she became a state champion on the balance beam, and she retired at 12. And I say that kind of laughingly because who retires from anything at 12? But in gymnastics, 12 is not necessarily young anymore. And I told her, I said, well, you can retire, that's fine, but you need to fill it with something else. I don't care what it is. You could do dance, you could do some other sport, you could, do whatever, but you have to do something. And that was a lesson that Arnie Cutler taught me, because an idle mind is a dangerous mind. And so if you keep it busy and you keep doing, you learn time management. And so she did. She got into Tae Kwon Do. Her and I studied together, and we both actually received our first black belt in the last month. So good timing on this.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah, thank you. So that was kind of the lesson. And now that she's wrapped up Tae Kwon Do, she's taking on new things. But what a great lesson that was to learn at an early age.
I think you're absolutely right. And my daughter does tumbling, and she's done gymnastics and various things, and trampolining she did for a while as well, and it's tumbling, which is really her thing now. Just likes to be upside down and flicking backwards and forwards and all of that kind of thing, which I still find amazing.
Yeah.
But like you say, it is that commitment, it is that time, but you can always find the time that you need, and it is that, I can't remember the exact law or the phrase that it is, but it's that kind of, we always cram everything into the amount of time we've got, don't we? So if you've got a month to do something, you still end up doing it either at the last minute or within a small window of opportunity. So I think, like you say, when you fill your time with other things which are really supporting you, either spiritually or emotionally or physically, you actually have the same amount of time as you probably would have been doing all these things anyway.
Well, and to your point, you also then learn time management. But you're right. If you give someone a week or a month, they're going to take a week or a month. And so it's that was a great lesson. There's one other one that I'll mention in a much shorter version. Dr. Keenan. I only mention him because he taught a history class, and it was a Russian history class. And I am not a history fan. I don't really enjoy that class. I don't know that I ever did in any of my years, except for this very one class, which is why I highlight him. This guy was just phenomenal. He walked in the first day of class, and he pulled out a box of index cards, so kind of like a recipe, those little recipe cards. Yeah. And he opened it up, and that's all. He had a briefcase, and he pulled out these cards. He set it on his desk. He would show up about 15 minutes early, and he'd pull a card out. He would start on the chalkboard. We didn't have grease boards back then, so he started on the chalkboard on one side of the chalkboard, and 15 minutes later, the chalkboard was full side to side. And he would teach each class according to the things he had written on the board. So he had proceduralized his lesson plan. He could have done transparencies, he could have done handouts, he could have done whatever, but his entire world was contained inside this little recipe box. And what he would do is he would teach us something about Russian history, and then he would contrast it with what was happening in the United States. And so we had a context, and he would just go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth in a very engaging, passionate way. You could tell he loved this subject matter. And I thought, I watched the other teachers, struggle to keep up, and they would maybe not have their lessons plans organized quite as fluently. And some of them were stressed out about getting things done. He always just seemed dialed in, and he was efficient. He would show up, 15 minutes before class started, and he would leave immediately when class was done. He had his life outside of school, and from a role model point of view, I don't know that I ever really loved history, but I sure enjoyed seeing how proficient he was at his craft. Very impressive.
Yeah, no, I can really identify with that. Who did you admire when you were young?
I think there's the standby answers of mom and dad and grandma and grandpa, and there's definitely family members that I did. But if I look professionally, I was a big Steve Jobs fan, back at Apple, and then he left and started Next Computing, and then he went back to Apple. And I just really loved the entrepreneurialism that he exuded. It was definitely a success story and still is to this day. But I'm going to pick someone that nobody's heard of. So there's a gentleman I worked with in corporate America. His name is John Malloy, really good guy, and he taught me a number of lessons. He was my boss, and there was probably 2 or 3 bosses above him before you got to the CEO of this organization. And I remember 2 lessons. So one of them, we were in a board meeting, which I don't typically get to attend at that level of my career, but I was there as a subject matter expert on a system, and the meeting ran long. I happened to be done with my portion, but I was sitting in the meeting off to the side trying to be quiet. And he was at the board table with all of the board members of this very big, large organization. All of them make lots of money and they're really important. And he stood up and he apologized and he said, "I'm sorry, but I promised my son that I would see his baseball game tonight. And so I'm going to have to leave. I'll catch up with you all tomorrow. Have a great evening." and he stood up and he left. And I thought, oh my goodness, what just happened here? Because nobody else was leaving and everybody else was running late. But nobody else did that. And I thought, wow, what a great honorable thing for him to do, to honor his family and to lead by example. And I use that term very specifically because I could have read that same lesson in a book and I could have heard it on a podcast, but to see him stand up and leave one of the most important meetings probably of his week or his month, to honor his son, I thought was just incredible.
And that really is a massive impact, isn't it? Like you say, to actually witness it, and because not only is it the words, it's the physicality of actually standing there and doing it, and I guess and then leaving, but just the fact that it just changes the dynamic of everything, and to be that secure with yourself, like you say, and actually have that respect for your family, having made the plan and all of that. That must have been, I can imagine the most impactful thing that you can possibly imagine.
Yeah, incredibly impactful. Same guy. I'm having a one-on-one meeting with him. We're in a closed office. There's glass on the outside of the office, so you can see inside. You can see that we're meeting. And so, closed door meeting. He and I are talking face to face. We're having our HR review or whatever it was. I actually don't even remember the content. And his boss opens the door and storms in, even though we were in the middle of a meeting, and kind of has one of these tirade, blah, 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 loud and animated, and, the sky is falling and, everything is going wrong. And I mean, it was just terrible. I don't even remember what the topic was. I just remember being frightened at how animated and loud this interaction was. And then just as quickly as he had stormed in, he closed the door and exited the office. And I was fairly confident that our meeting was over and that I was going to have to leave. But I didn't. He looked at me, he took a deep breath, and he said, okay, where were we? And he went right back to the meeting as if that event had never happened. And like I said, it took me probably a couple minutes to calm down myself. I wasn't even involved with the interaction. But again, that showed me that power of being present. Whatever's immediately in front of you, that person that you're working with now is the most important conversation you can finish. And that next thing can always wait, no matter how important you think it might be. What you previously set out to do, you can finish that first and then move on. And again, leading by example and seeing that play out was so powerful. I've probably told that story 10 times because it impacted me so greatly. Just amazing.
I'm just thinking in terms of the sorts of positions you're in now with your company and that kind of thing. Do you find those things are sort of pivotal in almost everything that you do on a daily basis in every meeting that you take? Because they were, like say, so impactful. Are they a real driver for, like say, the culture and everything that you want to provide?
Well, they definitely influence my decision. I don't know that by nature, I don't know that I'm as patient and focused and calm and zen-like as John was. But you know how you see those shows or those cartoons where you have a devil on one shoulder and the angel on the other.
Yeah.
And this is, this made the angel on my shoulder just stronger, where it'll whisper into your ear and say, that's okay. Take the time, do it right, honor the meeting or honor the conversation, or, it's great to have that person or that experience that you can look to raise your own bar, to expect more from yourself and know that it's not unachievable. We can all be better people. And when you see someone else doing it and making it look so effortless, it's really, a sanity check for yourself and to really expect more from yourself. And so to your point, I do hear that voice on a very regular basis, much more than I probably would have otherwise.
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting point, especially when we're younger and we're sort of looking around. And I think a lot of the time when we're young, we don't necessarily take it on board. But I think these conversations are great for just to allow people to at least have an inkling about it. It's the fact that we have mentors and teachers, not necessarily school teachers, but teachers and mentors and people around us that are giving us all this great advice and information all the time if we're just sort of, like you say, present enough to really understand what's going on. And I think even if it's just a little bit of kind of knowing the world's slightly different because this person has been a certain way, I think that's just a real pleasure for us all.
Oh, yeah, and wonderful segue. This is jumping ahead a little bit, but one of the advice I would have given my younger self is just that, is to find the mentors and the coaches and the influencers throughout your career. I mean, we hear the word coach, and many of us, at least historically, think that in terms of a sports application. But the more adept and experienced I get, the more I realize I don't have the answers. When you're young and you're overconfident and fresh out of college, you think you can conquer the world, and you very quickly find out how little you know. But what you don't learn until late, at least I didn't learn until later, is that there are plenty of people out there that want to be mentors and want to be coaches and want to help you be the best you that you can be. And if I had some advice to give myself, would be to find those mentors sooner and to be connected to them on a very regular basis, right? And some mentors, they kind of run their course and they've taught you what they can teach you, but that doesn't mean there isn't another one waiting around the corner to teach you the next lesson. And if I look back at some of the lulls in my career and my life, they almost always are accompanied with a lack of good coaching and mentorship. In other words, I let it lapse, and I didn't stay connected to that higher influence. And I really wished I had done that a little bit more. And maybe some good advice that others can take a hold of.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, and I can certainly, at various points in my life, whether it's a teacher in my professional career or, like you say, someone who's just had a way of showing me a different world around, or to be slightly different, showing up in the same world that I'm in, and all that makes a big difference. And I think the key thing for me often is the fact that my personal perspective often is the fact I just want to achieve it, or I want to get to whatever the level is, or the place that everyone wants to be, whatever that happens to look like for you. But as soon as you sit back enough and take a deep enough breath to realise that everything's about a journey, we're constantly moving, we're constantly growing, we constantly have the ability to learn from people around us, and then you sort of soften into the fact that, like you say, there are people around who can help and guide you, and if you're just willing and sort of supple enough to be able to be moved by all of that, then you really do get the chance to, like you say, to really just end up in a place which is really most supportive for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point, those people all around you, they might not all have every ingredient you need, but maybe one person is really good at work-life balance and another one's really good at marketing, and another, and so sometimes you have to augment your team to meet the challenges that you face. But the good news is there's plenty of options, and as long as you keep your eyes and ears open, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. It's amazing when you are open to it, how quickly you identify somebody in your general circle that could help you.
Yeah, absolutely, and having that space just to allow that to happen is key. Yeah, absolutely. So powerful that.
Mm.
What was the best piece of advice you've ever been given, and who gave it to you?
Well, there's a couple quick ones that I've applied many times. One is don't run away from something, run to something. And I was given that advice when I was disgruntled in a previous employment opportunity, and my manager pulled me aside and said, well, you shouldn't leave on a high note and you shouldn't leave on a low note. You leave in the middle when you have a sound mind and you feel like you've solved the problem or you've achieved the goals or whatever it is. But if you find yourself running away from something, then you've left an opportunity on the table. And I thought that was pretty profound, because we get stronger through those challenges. And if you leave amidst a big challenge, well, you've lost an opportunity to strengthen whatever it is that made that challenging to you. And so I really like that advice, and I've used it when we have employees or team members that consider moving on from our company. And so I will look at them in the face and I'll say, so are you running to something? Are you running to something, or are you running away from something? And if they get really excited about where they're going and the opportunity that presents them, then I'm happy for them. I'll give them a hug and I'll wish them a great career and let them know the door is open and they could always come back. But if they're leaving something that isn't working well here, I would much rather work with them and try to figure that out and try to solve the challenge, or to find an alternative perspective or whatever it is, to help them get stronger. So I really liked that perspective.
Yeah, I think that's really, yeah, it's really great advice. It just reminds me of that kind of, it's a bit like, I mean, I guess moving a job is a big decision, but that decision making generally, don't do it
Yeah.
when you're really angry or you're really annoyed about something or something's really got your goat. And also don't do it, like you say, when you're on a complete high and you think everything looks a certain way, because all of those emotions change. To have that space and that perspective to actually do it in that sort of neutral area, I think is really key as well.
Absolutely. One other piece of advice that I was given, this is a little more recently, um, but it's from an author. Her name is Jennifer Kern Collins. She wrote a book called The Drama Free Way. And I had some conversations with her quite extensively as I was working through some stuff in my life, and one of them was reacting to other people's drama, and that's what she calls it, is other people's drama, OPD. And what she taught me is that if you don't allow yourself to get sucked into the drama, then it isn't dramatic to you. And she said, if there's a perspective you can take, where much like a movie, if you are watching a horror movie or an action flick or a whatever kind of movie, if you get pulled in, you might find yourself being afraid or being, crying or being emotional. But if you're just watching it kind of like from afar, then you're not pulled in from an emotional point of view. And she taught me that when you are around people that are very dramatic and they live their lives in highs and lows, or if you have a dramatic situation, you do have the ability, once you recognize the drama, you have the ability to kind of like step back a little bit and take more of an audience member perspective to it, and then position your reaction. But once you get pulled in, typically what happens is drama responds to drama, and it can escalate. And I used to be an escalator. And so people would bring dramatic things. I would then get dramatic. They would get dramatic. And next thing you know, it was a heated exchange or it was something emotional. And so she taught me how to deal with that. And I that has been just an amazing clarifier in me as a person, as a husband, as a father, and definitely as a coworker with my team here. So that was really good advice.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. What does your future look like?
At this point, I think it has a lot more to do with just living life, creating memories, trying to live a life of happiness. But from a professional point of view, I'd really like to pay it forward more. I've had the great fortune of working with some really good coaches and mentors and learning the hard way in a lot of cases. And if I can, pay that forward and spend some time with business owners or younger managers and leaders, that's probably how I will spend my time moving forward. And that's my happy place.
Well, that's fantastic, and that's exactly what you're doing here today, which is I'm really grateful for. I think we've already covered so much great insights, which certainly have made me think about lots of things in my life, and I'm sure so many people listening as well.
Thank you.
What podcast, book, video, film, song, or any resource has had the biggest impact on your life, and why was that?
Boy, this list could take 4 or 5 podcasts in of itself, but I'll pick just a couple. One of my most memorable books is actually one that I can't say is my favorite, but it's a book called Pinkalicious. And it was a book my daughter loved reading, and she was so young she couldn't read. But we had read the book so many times that she literally could recite it word for word. And it's not a short book for like a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old or however old she was, but she could read it word for word, and she knew exactly when the page turns were, and she knew all the complicated words. And why was that a big impact in my life? Well, that was quality time, sitting with your daughter, reading these books before bedtime and watching her giggle at all the happy places and be scared at the scary places. And so I'll always remember that book. She probably doesn't even remember having read that book so much as a kid. There's another one by Disney. I'm sure it's a version of a story told many times, but it was called Button Soup. And the character, Daisy Duck, goes to her Uncle Scrooge's house, and she's hungry, and she asks for some soup. And he, of course, says he has no food and go away. And so she pulls out a button, and she says, "All I need is a cauldron with some water." And she puts the button in the cauldron, and he becomes curious and starts looking in at this cauldron of water. And she says, boy, what would make it better is salt and pepper. But since you don't have anything, I guess a button will have to do. And of course, he goes and gets some salt and pepper. And then she says something else and says something else. And next thing you know, this soup has potatoes and carrots and cabbage and salt and pepper and peas and vegetables. And it's this wonderful soup that they enjoy. And, the end of the end of the book is them all having a big feast with all their family and friends. And you think, okay, well, that's an interesting story. But what did it teach me? Well, sometimes when you approach people and you tell them about your grand and masterful plan with all of the bells and whistles and the grandiose ending, they might not be able to buy in. You might have to give them baby steps. You might have to say, here's the first step, and here's kind of what I'm thinking, and wouldn't this be nice? And then we can do version 2, and then we can do version 3. But version 1's not too bad. Are you interested in maybe taking this small step with me? And different personalities have different appetite for change. And if you try to bring this tornado of change into their world, you're just going to scare them away. And so I like the simplicity of that book. Start with a button, and in the end, you can have a beautiful, cauldron of soup. But when she tried to sell that big cauldron of soup on day one, Uncle Scrooge wasn't very interested in it. So interesting lesson learned at an early age, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely, and I've got a few big projects coming up myself, and that's just made me slightly stop in my tracks. I was just thinking,
you don't want to scare anybody.
That kind of, I'm just going to put the big letters at the top of the page saying this is where we're heading and what we're doing. and you're absolutely right. I've been there before. It's that kind of, but we just need to do, step one, just start to get a feel for what it is. And even if you've got a grand plan, actually, like you say, because it's all about community, it's all about bringing people along, isn't it? And just making sure that they understand what it is. What a great analogy.
Yeah, thank you. And you're right. And you can apply that to business, and, you bring on new employees and tell them you're going to conquer the world. You might not get them through the door, but if you can say, hey, come on in and do these couple things, and that's going to help us move forward, then they can maybe buy in. So there's a simple one. If I were to pick a business one, it'd probably be the 5 dysfunctions of a team, which many people have spoken about. But the lesson that I really like there is when your team members change, you actually become immediately dysfunctional again until you rebuild the functionality of the team. And I think we forget, just because we were a world-class team or we accomplished great results last year, if we have different team members this year, it's a new season. You have to reacclimate, you have to learn everybody's strengths and weaknesses, and you have to leverage those. And so that aspect of that book was also very influential to me.
Yeah, and I mean, you only have to look at sports teams, don't you, to see that you can buy in a whole load of fantastic world-class sports people, whatever the sport happens to be. But it often takes a season or 2 or 3 for them to sort of gel together and to sort of start working as one and being on the same page for it actually to really start to create the magic, which then takes them on to that sort of super level status of being able to win everything.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, you're right. Absolutely.
So for those people who want to find out more about you, is there a website or a place they can connect and explore a little bit more?
For sure. Our website is www.imagineiti.com. And of course, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook. Happy to connect to people on LinkedIn as well.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and allowing us to learn from your experiences. And I really appreciate everything that you've done and sharing your time, but also that wisdom and real understanding, I think, which is going to give us a lot to think about going forward. So thank you, Richard, so much.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Learning on Fire podcast. For more information, please visit educationonfire.com and follow the links from the homepage. This show is sponsored by the National Association for Primary Education. Education is not the filling of a pail, but the lighting of a fire.